Is it possible to visualize or describe or picture the world after all people have come into the realization of the spiritual age upon which we have entered, and of which some have become aware, at least to a certain extent? Yes, it's possible to visualize it. It may not be that way after it gets here, but at least to our sense, it would seem very much like a world that was made up of people all in the same frame of mind of we who are sitting here. Now, to all intents and purposes, we look like all the other human beings on earth. And there's no way to separate us or tell us from anybody else that's walking the face of the earth. Yet, if we have attained some measure of that which we are studying, spiritual life, spiritual law, the nature of God, then inwardly we are not the same people that we formerly were, and we are nothing like what we look outwardly. In other words, in the degree that we attain even a measure of the spirit that we're reading about and hearing about, studying about, meditating about, we have come to a place where we recognize that God is our source and God is the infinity of our being. Now let us for a minute accept that statement. God is the source of my being and the infinity of my being. Now tell me what I would ever need of you, or require of you, or want of you, or of anybody outside of this room. Nothing. Nothing. Since I am one with my source, since I recognize the infinite nature of my source, I can well take the position that nothing can be added to me. Nothing. God is my supply. God is infinite. My supply is infinite. God is my health. God is infinite. My health is infinite. God is my relationships, or the cement of my relationships, or the bond. So I need no friends, no relatives, nobody, except those that God brings into my sphere. Now, if that is my conviction in any degree, then I can come up to this point of our development. To him that hath shall be given. From him that hath not shall be taken even the little that he hath. Now, as human beings, we are those who have not. So we are always on the lookout for what we can get, earn, achieve, deserve, win. Then, of course, if our ability doesn't take us far enough in that direction, is when the human race starts to think of how it can connive, plot, plan, scheme. Then if it can't reach it that way, it goes a step further and says, how can I steal, rob, plunder, defraud? Now, it doesn't make a difference whether it's on the lowest step of humanity, that of marauding, or whether it's on the highest step of humanity, saying, oh, I deserve it, I earn it, I work for it. It is all humanness or getting. And that is why, even in the most respectable circles, we have very difficult types of competition. In business, in professions, in the art, and sorry to say, in religious work. Hard competitions. Why? Because as a human being, we have to get, accomplish, achieve, add to ourselves in some way or other. Even if we go into the noble business of a church business, we have to keep watching out that our competitor doesn't take our people away from our church door. It's sinful to believe that, but you know it's true. You know that. The same way that you know that even in church work, most churches, I mean, there are always drives for more funds and more monies and new buildings and new additions and new stained glass windows, and always to be a bigger church and a better church and a greater organ and a greater choir and let's hire a quartet in Europe. All competition, all based on getting. Now, a human being can't help that. A human being can't help that. That is the nature of humanity. That is the nature of the human mind. Now, if you catch one glimpse only of the spiritual nature of your being, the first thing you will remember, and don't forget this, that we have been quoting it every day this week, and I know I quoted it every day last week. I have meat, the world knows not. I am the bread of life. I am the wine. I am the water. I could give you water. I don't have to ask you for any. I can give you. I can feed the multitudes, 4,000, 5,000, 7,000, and have 12 baskets left over. I can heal the multitude, supply them. Do you see in that frame of mind that you would need nothing, require nothing of anybody? And now that doesn't mean that your rent wouldn't come due and that you wouldn't have clothing bills and fuel bills, but you wouldn't have to get the money for them anywhere. Automatically, in this state of consciousness, the way opens and you have your rightful employment, your gainful employment, or art or profession or investment, and without getting, without striving, without struggling. I don't mean without working. We all work. But you would not be working for a living. You would be working because it's the nature of our being to be active. It's our nature to be creative. The nearer you get to being in your realization of divine sonship, the more creative you are. Whether it's in creating new ideas of business, new inventions, new compositions, new books, new stories, the closer you get to the center of spiritual being, the more God's wisdom and God's activity. And that's why it is people who are touched with the Spirit can't stop. They can't rest. They're on the go continuously. You would think that they were driven by ambition or lust for money or something, or fame. They're not. It's just a drive to work, to work, to work, to do more, to bring forth more, because the Spirit doesn't let you rest, except at resting time. Then you rest beautifully, but they're short periods, because the renewal comes so quickly within from the infinite source Spirit. Now, as a businessman with a touch of Spirit, you would go to your office or your business or your shop, and you would perform every bit of duty called on you to do. Make calls, go out selling, buying, routing, whatever the business may be, but without any sense of responsibility, as if the world depended on what you do next, or even as if your own living depended on it. Your living goes out of your mind entirely. The first touch of the Spirit sends it out of your mind entirely. And from then on, it's automatic. And so it is with the creative works. It becomes automatic. All right. Now, I am the same individual who was a human being competing, selling, buying, working hard, rushing into the next town, believing that sales were dependent on my personal effort or being there when the store opened at 8:30 in the morning to be the first one to catch the buyer. I am that same one in the human picture, but if you look at me a few years later, when I've caught a glimpse of this, you say it's the same fellow. Yes, with this difference. But now if I'm there at 8:30 in the morning, it isn't because I'm in a hurry to see the buyer first, it's because I can't sleep any longer, and I've got to get out and work. I don't particularly care whether I see him first, second, or third, because nobody now can take my business from me. Now is when I commence to understand Mr. Burroughs. You remember his poem, Waiting? Serene I fold my hands and wait, nor care for wind, nor tide, nor sea. I rave no more against time nor fate, for lo, my own shall come to me. I stay my hands, I make delays, for what avails this eager pace? I stand amid the eternal ways, and what is mine shall know my face. Asleep, awake, by night or day, the friends I seek are seeking me. No wind can drive my bark astray, nor change the tide of destiny. What matter if I stand alone? I wait with joy the coming years. My heart shall reap where it has sown, and garner up its fruit of tears. The waters know their own, and draw the brook that springs in yonder height. So flows the good with equal law unto the soul of pure delight. The stars come nightly to the sky, the tidal wave unto the sea. Nor time, nor space, nor deep, nor high can keep my own away from me. Serene, I fold my hands and wait, whate'er the storms of life may be. Faith guides me up to heaven's gate, and love shall bring my own to me. Well, now that's the same spiritual man, you see, in an entirely, rather it's the same man, in an entirely different frame of mind. No longer rushing about trying to get, achieve, accomplish. Now he rests, goes about his business, never making false representations about his wares, never concerned whether the other salesman gets there first, only concerned with doing the utmost that God gives him to do each moment, and then knowing my own shall come to me. And it works out that way. Now, when this world comes into being, we'll be just what we are now, only we will not be seeking, we will not be fearful, we will not be doubtful, we will not be out on the run. We will be walking leisurely, and we will inwardly be resting in the realization, my own shall come to me. Why? Because God is directing it. Now, you see, in the new dispensation, there is no need at all for us to have wings, no need at all for us to have ethereal bodies. All we need is an ethereal state of consciousness, one that isn't continuously seeking to draw to itself. Now, you come to another law of the Bible. Remember, we've had one. To him that hath, to him that knows that he hath God, to him that knows that he hath access to the infinite invisible, to him that knows that God, all that the Father hath, is mine. To him that hath that wisdom, all these things shall be added. Seek not what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor wherewithal you shall be clothed. Your heavenly Father knoweth that you have need of these things, and it is his good pleasure to give you the kingdom. When you have that knowledge, I need take no thought. What is my own shall come to me by divine law. And it doesn't even have to come to me. All that the Father hath is mine, already mine. By what relationship? Joint heir with Christ in God to all the heavenly riches. Know ye not that you are heirs, heirs of God, joint heirs with Christ in God to all the heavenly riches? That is the relationship that enables us to know that I have. In fact, all that the Father hath is mine. Now just look at the fear and worry and doubt that drops off my shoulders and the wrinkles that drop off my forehead, because I need no longer take concern. I no longer need take thought. Now I have only one idea, and that's the next law of the Bible. Cast your bread upon the waters. You see, in the material world, everybody's down at the seashore looking for that bread to come in. You don't care much whose bread it is, because they get their hands on it, it's their bread. But that isn't the Bible teaching. No, the Bible teaching is cast your bread upon the waters. How can you do that? Because all the Father hath is yours. Because you already know there's a spiritual law providing for you. You know that you don't need human means. And so you can start with what you have. Now there too, that is subject to interpretation. In a human way, it might be like the poor widow who only has a mite. So you could begin with that mite. That's all. Just that mite. Doesn't make no difference if it's a penny, nickel, dime. If it really represents a sense of giving, then you start with that. It may be that there isn't any need for the giving of money at the moment, but there is some need for service. So you start with that. Inasmuch as you have 24 hours of every day, inasmuch as you have plenty of time, inasmuch as you have plenty of wisdom, you cast your bread upon the waters, whether you're doing it this minute with 5-cent pieces to the beggar on the street, or whether you're doing it the next minute by a spiritual treatment or mental treatment or prayer. But you're casting your bread upon the waters. It may be that you're not called upon either for money or for treatment or prayers, but you may be called upon for forgiveness. I don't mean that somebody may ask you for forgiveness. That's the sad part, that most people who should be asking for forgiveness don't even know they've offended us. As a matter of fact, to them, we're the offender. So we may not be asked in language for forgiveness, but you and I know who has offended us. You and I know who has ill-treated us. You and I know who are those who despitefully use us or persecute us, whether or not they know it. And so as long as you and I know it, we can begin to cast our bread upon the water. And it may be forgiveness. It may be that very thing. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Father, remember. I don't want them punished. I want them forgiven. Then you see you're casting your bread upon the water. In some way or other, the moment you have a spiritual vision of even the slightest degree, you are no longer in the business of getting. You are in the business of casting your bread upon the water, giving, sharing, offering, cooperating. Now, since God is your individual consciousness, since God, the universal, divine, is your individual consciousness, is not your individual consciousness filled full? It is. Then why try to add to it? Why not just draw from it? Now we have lessons, in Hawaii on this point, in the giving of treatments. And this might be a good place to introduce that idea, since we have a question here. Today I saw a girl have an epileptic fit. How would you treat the situation? Now, there's our cue. To him that hath, and cast your bread upon the water. And your first reaction is, but I don't know enough truth. And that's what I've been trying to drive home now the entire year of 1954. That's not true. There isn't anybody within range of my voice, there hasn't been anyone this entire year within range of my voice, that hasn't enough understanding to heal all manner of sickness, lack, limitation, and discord. The only necessary thing is the willingness to practice it. Now the reason is this: God is your consciousness. Therefore all the truth there is in God's consciousness is in your consciousness. There's no difference between your consciousness and God's consciousness. It's the same one. It's not two. Individually you are just the avenue through which all of the Godhead is flowing. So you have it all. Now you say, but I don't know that much, consciously know that much. This might surprise you. One statement of truth, any one statement of truth, contains all the truth there is in the world. You don't multiply truth by knowing more statements of truth. You only multiply more statements of truth. But you do not multiply truth. Truth cannot be multiplied, and it cannot be divided. Why? Truth is one. Now, if I say, I and the Father are one, that is truth. And may I say to you that that's all the truth there is in the world. There isn't any more. And no one needs any more than that. That's enough. You can found a whole lifetime. You can found generations of lifetime on that one statement. I and the Father are one. There's no other truth. There's no greater truth. There's no deeper truth. You can't go to India and learn anything more profound than that. You can't go to Tibet and learn anything more profound than that. You couldn't even go to the Master Christ Jesus and learn anything more than that. That was his final teaching, his deepest teaching. I and the Father are one. Thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me. For I and the Father are one. That's the final truth. That's the last truth. Now then, you say, will that heal anyone? Yes. Yes, it will. If you see misfortune on the street, in the home, in the newspaper, just the awareness entertained in your consciousness, thank you, Father, I and the Father are one. That's a universal truth, you know. If it's truth about me, it's truth about everybody under the globe. In the globe, on the globe, around the globe. There's nothing true about me that isn't true about you. There's anything true about us that isn't true about Jesus Christ. Nothing true about Jesus Christ that isn't true about us. All true. Every bit of it. We were immaculately conceived just like he was. God is our Father and God is our Mother. We call no man on earth your Father. He didn't only say that to himself, he said it to us. Call no man on earth your Father, for one is your Father, the God in heaven. So we're immaculately conceived too. God is our only parent. Father, Mother, God. One parent is all we have. The creative principle of the universe. As you perceive that, you must perceive that about every individual anywhere on the globe. There are no exceptions. God never set aside a law for you or for me or for anyone else. There is only one truth. And that truth is, God is your Father. Call no man on earth your Father. Now, if you didn't know that I and the Father are one, probably you knew that call no man on earth your Father. Well, that one would have been enough, because that embraced all the others. You would have looked at this girl and you would have said, call no man on earth your Father. What would that have meant? You have spiritual parentage, spiritual life, spiritual soul, spiritual body, spiritual health. All that would have come out of one statement, call no man on earth your Father. All right, perhaps you didn't know that truth. Maybe the only truth you knew was that he that is within me is greater than he that is in the world. Well, that's enough. The only reason this girl was sick is because she didn't know that there was a power within her greater than that physical condition. So you were knowing the truth for her. Greater is he that is within you than he that is in the world. One truth, one statement, that'll make up your treatment. And out of that one, you'd be surprised, if you were sitting quietly in your room, how out of any one statement that you know, a dozen others would flow. And as a matter of fact, we did have that experiment here last year at the center, when we all took one passage of Scripture into meditation. You remember that? And we sat there and waited, and waited and waited, until another one popped in. Not until we remembered another, but until another one automatically came in. And then we sat and waited, and a third one. And before we were through, we proved that just by sitting there, 3, 4, 5 statements of truth would follow each other and refer to each other. They'd have relationship to each other. And actually, you could look back and see where they constituted a treatment. So all anybody needs in this world to cast their bread upon the waters, or to acknowledge that all the Father hath is mine, all they have to do is to know one statement of truth. And now let us assume that there is somebody on earth who doesn't know one statement of Scripture or one metaphysical statement. All they have to do is sit quietly and wait, and one will come to them. You say they don't know any. Of course they do. They don't know it. Everybody's read newspapers or magazines. How many times have they seen things in them? May not remember them, but in that moment when they're sitting down needing them, they'll come right into expression. So it is that our spiritual universe is not going to be made up of people flying around in the air with ethereal bodies and wings on their backs. They're going to be made up of people just like we are, only people who have risen above that mortal state of consciousness that is always trying to get, accomplish, and receive, and has now come to see that my function in living is giving. I'm only rich in proportion as I can give, not in proportion as I can get. There are loads of people with $1 million that are poverty-stricken and haven't got enough to eat. They have it, but they won't spend it. They're poor. Loads of wealthy people will not eat sufficiently, will not dress sufficiently. They're poor. They're poverty-stricken. Money isn't wealth. Too many people have got money that have no wealth. But the ability to give what we have, to cast our bread upon the water, whether it's in the form of money or a treatment or a prayer or a service, that ability transforms us from material people, from mortal people, from human people, into spiritual beings. And that's what the next world will be made up of. Now, you only have to go back to our first evening when I said to you that we here could stop all future wars, just the amount of us that are in this room, and bring it about within very few years, too. So few that every one of us would be here to witness it. How? All we have to do is go home, if necessary, sit up all night, and ask ourselves the question, should we throw the first bomb or let Russia throw it? What do I really want? Do I want to save my life at their expense? Or would I rather give my life to prove that I am not going to consent to the use of the sword, the weapons of man? The martyrs of old gave their lives in order to give us the proof of Christianity. That's why we have it. Had they said, I don't want to lose my life, no, I'll give up my Christianity, I don't want it, not at the expense of my life, it would have died with them. It has only lived because of their example. We saw that it must be something wonderful, it must be worth having if our ancestors were willing to die for it. Why do we have freedom? Suppose our ancestors, I don't care whether it's my old Hebrew ancestors or your American colony ancestors, supposing they had said, we don't want liberty well enough to give our lives for it, where would we be today? A colony, perhaps. Why? Well, if they didn't think enough of liberty to die for it, why should we think enough of it? That would have been our inheritance, the realization that our life was greater than our freedoms. And there you are. Oh, but what happened? My Hebrew ancestors and your Christian ancestors all decided that freedom was worth more than life. Who's their freedom? No, they weren't going to have it. They were going to give up their lives. They were going to give up their lives for our freedom. And they did. Lives, legs, sanity. They gave that up. Not by being drafted. They weren't drafted. They just knew that freedom was the thing to have, the thing to be. And so the Hebrews fought their old slave masters, and the Christians back in the revolutionary days fought the British. And by their dying and their willingness to die, they proved to us that liberty and freedom are mighty, wonderful things worth having, and they've given us the heritage that we would be willing to die for freedom. Now the question is, can we take the next step and say, I'm willing to die to prove that war is wrong. I'm perfectly willing to let any country that wants to throw bombs on us throw it on us. What would happen to them after they threw a few and saw no defense and no defenders? Why, you know there's a law of God that would stop them dead in their tracks. They wouldn't throw many bombs until this principle that we stood for would show them the error of their ways. You see, people out in the human world can rob and cheat and defraud each other and sometimes go forever without getting caught at it, paying a penalty. Why? They're merely doing it to other people who either are doing it or would do it if they weren't afraid of getting caught. So there's no law operating against them. But you let a person of dishonest means start his monkey business against someone who's got a principle that he's holding up here, and see where the boomerang goes. Then you'll find that you cannot invade. That's the meaning of the statement. Daniel, in him innocency was found. That's why the lions couldn't get their jaws onto him. Innocency. What kind of innocency? A lack of hate or fear of lions. And that principle was, what was wrong with David? Little David goes out there without armor and with a little pebble and kills Goliath. You see the principle operating there. He needed no defense, he needed no offense. A pebble isn't an offense or a defense. That was an insult to Goliath. I can face you with nothing, little pebble. And the man died. And that's usually what happens when we stand and face our enemies. They drop dead. They can't help it, because there is no power for them to get their teeth into. In us all innocency is found. That is the pure principle. Now you let a group of people only as big as we are in this room say, that's my principle. Take my life, but I won't take yours. Go ahead. Throw it. I'm willing, I'm ready. I offer right here and now my life, my body. I'll give my temporal sense of body. I won't give my soul. I won't let myself become a murderer. I won't consent mentally to murder. And so right here and now, take me. Let her go Gallagher. The moment you would take that as an actual, I don't mean lip service, I mean fight it out inside of your own being until you do offer up your body and your human sense of life and say, now I've made the surrender. It's no longer mine. Now take it. You would find that on the invisible plane, this would so fire the world that inside of 30 days you'd hear people in the news. Remember, I'm not talking about proselyting or going out and advocating this to the public. I'm saying we, in the secrecy of our own being, offer up our bodies and lives and say, good, Russia, if you want to take it, but I'm not going to fight back. You would find that within 30, 60, 90 days, the idea would be popping up in ministers' sermons. It would be popping up by congressmen on the platform for re-election. It would be popping up here and there, and it wouldn't be 2 or 3 years until laws would be passed. No more atomic bombs, no more hydrogen bombs, and it wouldn't be another few years till they say, well, if you're not going to have that kind of warfare, why any? Let's cut it all out. And all that can happen. I go further than that. All that will happen. Because there are enough of us now within range of my voice, and my voice last week in Portland, and my letter when it comes out, there are enough people who are going to go to their rooms and say, does he mean it? Do I mean it? Can I mean it? Can I? Do I want this government to throw that bomb to save my life? Is that what I want? Is that what I want? Do I think that Russian people's lives are less than my lives? And what will be achieved if we do take their lives first? Won't they be waiting for us at the next post to come back at it? Certainly. No. If we take our stand now and say, go ahead. My old folks said that freedom, liberty for their children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, was worth their dying for. I say that the cause of no more wars is worth my dying for. Well, you know right well that It couldn't happen. If two armies right now went out and faced each other and one threw down all their arms, the other one couldn't fire at them. They wouldn't have the power to do it. We only fire at the other fellow when we know that he is ready to fire at us. Isn't that the secret of what they call wild animals, beasts? Hasn't that been revealed in books, that there are no wild beasts? That if you go into the woods without a gun, you bring him back alive. If you go in with a gun, you got to watch out that you ever come out again. Why? Because that which we call wild beasts, the moment you're in there with that gun, they smell it. They know what's coming out of your body, and they attack in self-defense, knowing that if they don't, you're going to get them. But we're told by Bringing Back Alive Buck and other men who have gone in the same way that they've never been molested by wild beasts, even in Africa. But they went in without revolvers. We've had people this last year come back from the headhunting country. The first time that an entire expedition ever went into a headhunter's country, and everyone came back alive. Why? The first time they all went in without weapons. All went in without weapons. Who's going to touch an unarmed man? Only insane people could do that. No sane person, no normal, even human being would ever attack an unarmed man. Never. So it'd have to be demented, and there aren't whole races of demented people. Oh no. If a few individuals, or when a few individuals in this world give up their physical sense of life, rather than give up their souls to being murderers again, then you will find that this law, this invisible law, will operate. Well, you know right well that the main reason Russia's scared pink is they know we've got them ring around with the bombs. And well, all this brings us back to this. We have enough spiritual light in this room to stop wars, just as you have enough spiritual light in any one statement of truth you know to heal any condition. Only put that one into practice. Don't think that if you could only remember 99 more, that your treatment would be 99 times more effective, because that's 99 statements of truth, not 99 truths. There is only one truth, and that one truth is infinite. One with God is a majority. That's what the Master tells us. One with God. One individual dedicated to the principle of pure being is enough. One Christ can lift 1 million people into a higher state of consciousness. One avatar, one teacher, one guru, one spiritual mind can lift 1 million people above the level of their own being. And so it is that any student can start with any truth they know and begin. I watched a doctor begin this with just one truth, and that was that disease has no law. Just disease has no law. And that conviction within him has done his work. Disease has no law. Think of that. If that statement is true, that disease has no law, that's the only statement of truth you'll ever need to heal all the disease there is in the world. That's all. Think of that now. Then you'll know why I've said in the writings that if you ever earn $1 spiritually, you never again will know lack. In other words, if that first dollar comes in outside of what we call our human way of earning a livelihood, unsolicited, unearned, just almost, you may say, dropping out of a cloud, that is the evidence of God with us. Why is this true? Not because of the dollar, but because the dollar is the evidence of the omnipresence of spirit. And if spirit is omnipresent, those dollars will just multiply themselves. That's why it is, if you once heal anyone, even of the smallest things, from then on, healing is a simple thing. and will progressively unfold in your consciousness until you're doing the greater works. Why? Because healings have nothing to do with you or me. They're an activity of the Spirit within us. And if we ever attain that Spirit within us, there's no limit to its work. In your writings you state God is not a creator. This is a little puzzling, as the Scriptures have led us to believe God is the creator. Will you please elucidate? Well, that is one of those things that comes up because of a liberty with words. We say, for instance, that the Wright brothers invented the airplane. As a matter of fact, they didn't, nor did anybody before them. The laws governing airplanes have existed since the beginning of time. Nobody ever invented them. They discovered them. Nobody ever invented wireless. Nobody ever invented a telephone. Those are instruments hooked up in accord with certain engineering laws. Now, nobody invented those laws. You can't say those laws didn't exist yesterday. Who would ever say that the laws of automotive engineering didn't exist a million years ago? They've always existed. But in the process of time, men drew them forth from their consciousness, these laws, and then hooked them up. But they've always existed. You might just as well say that a composer invented some new music. There's no such thing in all the world. All the music that ever existed has always existed in consciousness. A composer can reach back and draw it forth into expression. But if it wasn't there, how would he ever get it? You can't make it up. You can't make up music. Music lies way, way back in consciousness, same place that poetry does, literature, art, painting, sculpture. It's always there, way back in consciousness, and an individual reaches back and brings it forward into visibility. Now, do men who build bridges invent those laws of engineering, or do they discover laws that always have been and could have been utilized thousands of years ago? All you have to do is go back to the days of Caesar and look at the wonderful roads he built. There haven't been any more wonderful roads built than those built by Caesar. So all the road built, look at if only all of you, those of you who have been to England and seen the walls, the fences in some of the old churches, what do they call these? Not fences, these things between farms. No, bricks, made out of bricks and stones. Walls, like the Great Wall of China. All of these walls, you would see that they knew as much about engineering in those days as we know now. There are no better roads than those built by Caesar's armies. None. I don't doubt that there are any roads in this modern age that could be said to have lasted, that would last 2,000 years. Yet the roads built by Caesar are still the best roads available. They knew the engineering secrets. Look at the pyramids. They knew engineering secrets. In other words, nobody invents anything. We discover laws and then hook them up. Where were those laws? Out here in space? Were they in time? No, they were neither in space nor in time. They were in consciousness. They were in consciousness, and we reached back into consciousness and brought them forth. Now, so it is with all creation. There is no such thing as a time of creation. In other words, you can't ever imagine that there was a time when there were no seeds or crops, and then all of a sudden, out of nothingness, seeds appeared or crops appeared. No, all of these things are evolving out of consciousness. Can you imagine a time? Well, if you can imagine a time when the world was a blank, you can imagine a time when God wasn't God. Well, let's put it in a simple way. When did 2 times 2 begin being 4? Now just think about some time that you can think of when 2 times 2 weren't 4. When was that? Was there a time when you could have a 2 here and a 2 here and they weren't 4? No. Was that created? No. Actually, it's a state of is. That's a state of is that always was. 2 and a 2, 4. 4 and a 4, 8. Always was. Never was a time when you could separate them. So it is, if you can visualize the fact that there couldn't have been a time, when do-re-mi wasn't do-re-mi. There may have been a time when nobody knew it, when nobody could voice it or sing it, but it always existed, ready to be brought forth. Just as there always were these laws of automotive engineering, airplane engineering, but men came along and brought them out of their consciousness. Look how many millions of years oil has been in the ground. When was oil invented? It was never invented. It's always been in the ground, been evolving there for millions and millions of years. There came a time when we needed it in this form and then began drilling for it. When we did, though, it was there. When did diamonds begin? Well, before they were diamonds, they were carbon in another form. When did coal begin? Never. It was trees and tree trunks and rotting shrubs. Evolution, not creation. Everything changes form, but the principle of the form has always been there, and it's always been evolving. So when we say God is not a creator, we mean actually that there never was a time of creation, that all it is began through an evolving process. Consciousness has always been here. Now, as you look at these pictures here on the wall, and you see these sailboats, and the primitive oars, and the primitive costumes, and the primitive weapons, and you can say, well, when did killing begin? A long time back they had weapons. A long time back. Nobody invented it. Cain and Abel do not represent a time in history, but an evolution in consciousness. And so the day will come when there will be no Cain, when there will be no murder in our consciousness, there will be no thieving in our consciousness. And then they'll say, when was the perfect man invented? It never was. The perfect man was always here. He just evolved out of his old concepts of being. And that brings us to this. There are no detached outer effects. All flows forth from consciousness. Now, as humans, we are an outlet for 2 states of consciousness. The material, which includes the mental, and the spiritual. As humans, reaching out here to acquire, we are governed by all those laws of acquisition. We are governed by all those laws of outside powers. So we believe that bombs are power. We believe that guns, bullets are power. We believe that medicines are power. We believe that germs are power. In our material state of consciousness, we think of everything out here as power. That's why we even believe that dollars are power. That's material state of consciousness. It has its powers out here, in people, in dollars, in germs, in medicines, in climate, in weather, in food. Anything out here can be a power to the materially minded. Now, as a person begins to lose some of that materiality, or let us say that as they gain some sense of the spiritual, what happens? They stop placing power out there. The first thing they do, if they're on this metaphysical path, is they begin to see that medicines aren't power, that God is power. And so they depend more on God, the invisible, than on medicine in the visible. They begin to realize that strength isn't in the muscles. It doesn't take a lot of exercise to have strength. And so instead of exercising 3 hours a day, they might exercise 10 minutes a day. But for the rest, they'll depend on the Spirit. Then they learn that we do not live by bread alone. And so food will not get to be such a, I was going to say necessity, I won't use that word, but it won't quite occupy quite as much of our importance in our thought, because we know we're not fed by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Every word of truth we know is bread, wine, and water. And so gradually, in the spiritualization of consciousness, we stop placing power out here in persons, in things, in circumstances, and conditions, and we place that power in the kingdom of God within our own being. And so you'll find that there are no detached outer effects. All outer effects are determined by our state of consciousness. Now, if we have a material state of consciousness that says, no, I must get money, or I must get fame, or I must get recognition, or I must get rent, or I must get this, then that state of consciousness places its power out there in those things, and then it's always a victim of that belief. The moment that state of consciousness changes, and little by little you begin to see, oh, wait a minute, I don't think that outer is quite as important as I thought it was. No, I'm commencing through study, through spiritual study. I'm really commencing to see that God is a power, and God isn't out there. God is within me. God is an essence, an invisible. Oh, I have less fear of what's outside. I have less concern. I have less need of what's outside. Now I have transferred more and more of my allegiance and power to the kingdom of God within me, so that the kingdom of God within me can now do the things that I used to think people and things out there could do. And that is, of course, the transition to spiritual consciousness. Now, there are no detached outer effects. All flows forth from consciousness. Now then, the minute that you no longer have fear of germs, infection, contagion, you can be a healer and go among all the infectious and contagious diseases you want. I'm sure that out of all the people here and out of all the practitioners you've known, you've probably never known one that picked up an infectious or contagious disease while about their work. Why? Because in the consciousness of a practitioner there is no power in infection or contagion. And as long as they don't place it there, it can't be there of its own accord. It's in the same way that if you, I don't know the history so much outside of Christian Science, but I do know that in Christian Science, that you will not find, I would dare say, 10 to 20% of the illness that there is outside of Christian Science. Why? Why? It's the same world, the same universe. They have gradually, over the years, come to take their faith and confidence out of germs, out of infection, out of drafts, out of all the things that other people are fearing. And now what they externalize is their own state of consciousness, which is fearlessness. To them the power is within, not without. And so it is that you'll find wherever there are people in the metaphysical world who have really caught a vision. If they've caught Christian Science, good. Others have caught the vision through unity. But no matter how you do it, if you've caught the vision that God is the power, and that there's no power in externals, you're not subject to 10 or 15 or 20% of the disease that your neighbor is. I've seen it in schools. I've had school teachers show me their records. You don't find absences, long absences with Christian Science children. You don't find long absences with grown-up Christian Scientists from their business. Why? Because disease has dropped off about 80%. Now, so it is with anyone, and should be certainly in the infinite way that much or more, that as you commence to see power isn't outside, power isn't out there in a germ, power isn't out there in heredity, power isn't out there in a body. Power, the kingdom of power is within me, in consciousness. The infinite invisible is the power. So it is then that state of consciousness outpictures itself as health and harmony. We cannot eliminate evil, but we can transform the material sense which produces the evil. Now remember that. That's the secret. You don't remove evil. You don't remove evil. If you have a state of consciousness that has evil in it, you must externalize evil. But if all purity is found in you, all innocency is found in you, then you must externalize good. And so if you have a state of consciousness that has in it fear of disease, fear of death, fear of age, fear of contagion, fear of infection, you are externalizing it. If you have attained a state of consciousness in which you have caught a least bit of glimpse that God is the principle of life, you are beginning to externalize 50, 60, 70, 80% more of health and harmony. There are no detached outer effects. Every effect in your life is the product of your consciousness. And the only way to change it is not to get rid of the effects. That's why I say over and over again, it's a nice thing to be able to bring healing to our patients and students, but it isn't the highest form of ministry. The highest form of ministry is when you bring to them a state of consciousness free of fear. Then you don't heal their diseases. They haven't got any more diseases to be healed of. And what few do come to them, they can handle for themselves because they've lost their fear of externals. Now, when you no longer fear or hate externals, you're free. And you're not free from anything. You're free in Christ, in truth, in God. You're never free from anything. You're always free in the spiritual truth, in spiritual life. Christ is an activity of individual consciousness within you and me. But each of us must find a way to find it, contact it, realize it within himself. This is not easy, since we have known generations of the sense of separation, but it is a task to which we can and eventually must dedicate our lives. Christ is the secret of harmonious, joyous, peaceful, and fruitful living. Therefore we dedicate ourselves to this inner prayer, contemplation, meditation, and communion until sooner or later we actually realize Christ, after which we eagerly surrender ourselves and become a beholder as it lives our lives. Now what does all this mean? To begin with, what is Christ? Remember we said it has no relationship to a man named Jesus. Christ isn't Jesus, but Jesus was Christed. In other words, Jesus had access to this Christhood. Jesus attained his Christhood. That is much like saying that Paderewski was a master pianist. What do we mean? That he was music or something? No. But that he had musical consciousness and could draw on it and bring it through. We say that Einstein is a mathematical genius. What is he? Mathematics? No. He's a state of consciousness through which mathematics is flowing. That's what we mean by Christ. Christ is a state of consciousness. It's a pure state of consciousness because it is a state of consciousness that does not hate or fear externals. It says to Pilate, "Thou couldst have no power over me unless it came from the Father in heaven." It says to the impotent man, "What did hinder you? Pick up your bed and walk." He has no fear of externals. That's Christhood.